Hello, I'm Robert Rickover, an Alexander Technique teacher in Omaha, Nebraska, and guest is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. And we're going to talk about the titles of F. Matthias Alexander's 4 books. And I have not really warned Imogen ahead of time that this would be the topic. But before we begin, Imogen has in her possession, which she will hold up, a book that all 4 of Alexander's books in it, which I had never heard of before. Apparently, it was something to do with Troop and Ann Matthews training course in Manhattan years ago.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I
don't know.
I got it, in the first month or 2 of training. We were all advised to get it, and I wrote off to someone and got it. So
1990s kind of period.
Well, the edition is 1997,
Yeah.
so that was definitely before I was training. So.
Yeah. Well, I thought, well, he wrote 4 books, and it might be interesting to just very, very briefly talk about the titles and what do they convey in a way. So we're going to start with his first book, Man's Supreme Inheritance. And I think what he meant by the supreme inheritance, and I think it would have been a wonderful change of title if he had said our supreme inheritance, by the way.
Indeed.
But, he was a product of his time. His written in the sort of the main version of that book came out in the late teens, 1917.
1918 is the one that I have in this.
Yeah, that's so it was a long time ago, and we're in a different era today. But what I think he meant by that was I think what he thought that supreme inheritance was that we have ability to use our thinking to direct ourselves in activity instead of just going by what things feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Mind over feelings. Now, he wasn't trying to get rid of feelings so much, but he was saying, because you're going to have feelings one way or another. But the idea is, if you want to change something, or if you want to assess what's going on with you, feelings are a very unreliable guide to that. They can be useful. They can definitely be useful, but you got to be careful because they can be conditioned by how you've been moving. If you've moving a certain way forever and it feels right, it's going to feel right, even if it's not a particularly good way of being.
Yeah.
I think that's the idea here.
Yes, I think so. I think we've got to be careful with the word feelings.
Not saying
as they can also. I think in this context, it more means
physical.
What we feel physically, not emotions. Although he may have had some things to say about that.
We probably want to know what he had to say about that. But yeah, physical yes. Sensations. And I think one of the best quotes on the feelings is from our colleague Mio Morales, who said, feelings are yesterday's news. By the time we feel it, it's the thing that caused the feeling is come and gone. So that makes them a bit unreliable. But the other thing about that title is it's not just it's our inheritance, it's our supreme inheritance. And so I think he's carving out, he's saying, this is really important stuff. This isn't just about physical culture or back pain or being a better actor or musician. This is big stuff, right? He's sort of jumping onto the world stage and saying, I got an idea that's really, really important.
Yeah. And I think he's right. And
Yeah,
it
I think
reminds me of one of our uh, previous conversations about some of his quotes and his tendency towards sweeping statements.
this is a
And it's just like
speaking.
man supreme encouragement. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, so he's just making this grand entrance. If you think of his acting proclivity, he was an actor. He's making a grand entrance into the world of ideas with that. Second book, I think around 1924-ish, maybe you could look at you.
Here, I can tell you exactly. I know, 23.
23. Constructive conscious control. I think the full title is
of the individual.
The individual. Right. Right. So if our supreme inheritance is learning how to use our thinking instead of relying on feelings, then the question is, how exactly, what would be some good things to think? Or, how would we actually do this? Right? I think it's like answering that question. It's one thing to say, hey, we should get out of the feeling plane and into the thinking plane. But then the question arises, well, how?
Yes, so it's through constructive conscious control.
I will say that Marjorie Barstow, my main Alexander teacher, every once in a while, maybe a dozen times over the years that I experienced, she would write out on a blackboard C, constructive, and she would have a whole little talk about what that meant. Constructive, well, that means you're doing something useful. Conscious, that means you're using your brain. Control, you're taking charge. So she had there were different variants, but she felt that phrase was really important. She loved that phrase. So that's the second book. And any point you want to jump in here?
Yeah, for sure. It's just, again, probably to do with a more contemporary awareness, but the word control
control.
Is like guidance might be
guidance might be a better word. Yeah, constructive conscious guidance, self-guidance, or
anyway, but again, it's in the context, and I understand what he means by that.
So Alexander's third book, and I would say by far the most accessible one for anyone who actually wants to read Alexander, is Use of the Self. The use of the self, right? So he's putting it right on you, yourself. If you're reading this, got a self, and he's talking about that. And the word use is a bit of, in the Alexander world, the word use has a really important, it's a really important word. It refers to how you use yourself in any particular situation. Do you use yourself well, or do you put strain on yourself doing things so you're
using your constructive conscious guidance, or are you moving out of or reacting out of habit, or yes. So,
and I think he's also thinking, well, why? I think there's a little bit answering the question, why? Why would you want to be interested in man's supreme inheritance and constructive conscious control? I mean, they sound great. What's in it for me, the reader? And I think what's in it for you, the listener or reader or whoever, is that if your use is better, your functioning will be better. Just a little aside here, Alexander was an Australian and very interested in horses and horse races. He was a bit of a gambler on horse races, and he is reputed on pretty well because he would go down before the race and look at the horses as they were being walked around or walking and whatever they do before a race. And he would sort of take a look. How's that horse using themselves today? And it might be better or worse than the odds would suggest. And he would take that into account because the way they use themselves, just the ordinary pre-race situation, was likely to be kind of like the way they used themselves when they were actually racing. Whatever patterns existed with walking, it was very likely to be similar. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's use of the self. So he's
so just out of interest, that was published in 1932. So it's like they're coming in that more or less 10-year. Oh no, the first one's a little bit shorter, but apart from that, kind of 10-year-ish in
and
increments.
Just with regard to that book, he was working on it in early 30s. Marjorie Barstow was around. She was on his first training course, and she said that he spent hours and days over the exact wording. This is the book that he really wanted to make as understandable as possible and not lose the basic message. And it's shorter than all the others, quite a bit, and it's definitely the most readable of his books, I would say. Yeah,
I agree.
So that's Use of the Self, book number 3. And then we have the fourth book, which I think the first edition maybe came out in the 1930s, 1940s.
I get this is copyrighted as 1941.
1941.
Certainly the one in...
No, I think 41 is right. That book is called Universal Constant in Living. I got the exact title.
Yeah, The Universal Constant in Living. Yeah.
So he's introduced a term that I don't think appeared anywhere earlier. Universal constant. What does that mean? Here's my take on it. Wary of delving into Alexander's brain on this, but my take on it is that in a sense, there are only two, at any moment in time, it's probably the case that one of two things is going on you, the person reading the book or anyone. That either you are thinking or engaging in some mental process or some way of proving your use, or it's being harmed by your activity or your non-thinking about it. In theory, of course, there's like neither one. You could just be going on a level plane without getting better or worse. But in practice,
it seems.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I feel wary of like binaries, right? It's either this or this. But in this context, it's a whole spectrum. But you're always either moving toward even the tiniest little bit, a little improvement in your use, to use the term, or a little what's the opposite of improvement? A little reduction in your good use.
So there's a constant influence on you
yes,
that's related to how your use is changing. It's either
that's interesting because and it's been many, I hate to say many years since I actually opened and read the book, but my initial interpretation of the title was more that there's this constant principle that we can bring to bear throughout whatever activity, whatever we're doing, whatever part of life we're in.
A universal constant. So
indeed.
Oh no, I had not thought of that.
What do you think of that?
Oh, I like that. I like that. Yeah, the universal constant in living. Yeah, that might be the best explanation I've heard, actually. As I remember from reading, it's been a while since I read that book also. But I think, if I'm maybe wrong about this, that he was talking a little bit, he was a little bit thinking about specifically about the head-neck relationship. That relationship, which to him, he coined this term, what was that thing? This was the
primary
control.
Wow. I don't think he did coin it.
Oh really?
I think it might have come from. Anyway, he took off with it. I'm sure one of our listeners, viewers can let us know.
We want to hear too.
But it's definitely a concept he's used in terms of the Alexander technique.
Yeah. Well, he did certainly feel that the relationship between your head and your spine, really your neck or nexo combination, was something that was either moving you towards an improved use or less good use. So I think part of that idea, the importance of this head-neck relationship, but in any event, that it's just like with the use of yourself, how you use yourself is important. But here it's not just important, it's affecting you all the time, one way or the other.
Exactly.
And the suggestion was maybe it'd be well to nudge it in the direction of helping you.
Yeah.
Which is going to involve
that you could bring to bear a little constructive conscious control.
And reach and take advantage of your supreme inheritance. I mean, I think that's how I see it. I don't know at all whether Alexander was thinking along these lines when he came up with these titles, but there they are, and they seem to have a little bit of a pattern.
They do. I can see what you mean now, how they kind of build.
Yeah, they build on each other, and then they reflect back on each other. So anything you want to add? We're going to I would just, before you say anything, anyone has any ideas about this that we haven't talked about, we love to hear them. So anything else you want to add to our talk?
Not right now that I can think of, but I would really love to hear what other people think, and maybe other people who have more knowledge on the background that might be able to.
Yeah, people who know. There are those experts in the Alexander world.
Yeah,
which I'm certainly not.
No, me neither.
I did earlier. The Use of the Self is certainly his accessible book, but there's another book that I think, if anyone listening to this is sort of motivated to actually read his books or revisit them, and they don't want to read all of them because that take all. there is a book, and I don't know
Oh, do you mean
the one that was done by a newspaper man. Yeah, Imogen is searching for the book.
Yes, I don't.
It's we'll find it. I've got a copy here somewhere. I'll find it.
The Essential Writings of F.M. Alexander?
No, that's my Zell's book. There's a book that's like, it's basically a summary. It's a shortened version of his books. They're all combined.
I don't think I have that.
One. I'll send you a link. I think you can get it through what's his name? Fisher's. John, what's his name?
Yes.
So the history of the book is Alexander was engaged and had a libel suit that he had brought to bear in 1949, I think, against an South African person who had disparaged his work. I don't know all the details of that. And this book was written to be put in evidence in the trial. And it was written by a journalist that Alexander knew. And I think it's called the Authorized Summaries of Alexander's book, something like that. And Alexander is said to have initialed or checked each page. Like he did have his blessing, as he felt, yes, this guy has captured it. And I highly recommend that book because it's clear. He does, it's kind of brilliant because he does much shorter than all four of the books, and he summarizes it pretty well, and he is a little shifting around within the text, but not much. It's really quite a good book that I think hasn't gotten the publicity.
I actually didn't know about that. So,
well, any of our Alexander friends, I'll make sure to get the title, and I think Gene Fisher, right?
Yes.
He has it there. I'll check and see.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something you'll get on Amazon.
No, the name of the press is on the tip of my tongue, but I can't quite bring it. Moritz, yes, that's it.
I'll put a link to that. That's a great place to get any of the more obscure stuff and just thing. I mean, out of print stuff and that kind of thing. So, anything you want to add to our title discussion?
I don't think so. Very interesting as always, Robert.
Please, listeners, viewers, let us know what you think. Let's come back to it. So, my guest today has been Imogen Ragone, an Alexander teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.